From the Post Building in downtown North St. Louis, this is Inside City. This week on Inside City, Brian Monheiser and Anthony Calamito of Geo261 sat down with Frank Romo, CEO and founder of RomoGIS. With a background in urban planning and geospatial technologies, Romo develops applications for cities, nonprofits, and research organizations, aiming to empower communities with tools and skills to create positive change.
All right, welcome to Insight City. On today's show, we have Frank Romo, CEO of RomoGIS. I want to first off welcome you to St. Louis. We're excited to have you in town for some of the events that are going on for this Geospatial Week. I believe it's your first time in the Lou. Now that you've had a couple days to explore, and what are you enjoying the most about our city, and how does this compare to some of the other cities you've worked in and around?
Thank you very much for having me. I'm very excited to be here. I think it's been a great time. I've really vibed with the people here. There's a lot of great people, a lot of people trying to make moves, make a difference, and I vibe with that. And anybody who's trying to make an impact, I'm down with. And here it seems like there's a lot of people doing that. So overall, my travels, this, like you said, this is my first time to St. Louis, and it's been good. I've had a really good time so far.
How's it compare to some of the other cities you've been in or around?
Yeah, most of my time is spent in Detroit nowadays, and so being in the Midwest, I think it compares a lot. I think they can see a lot of similarities, and I think hopefully I'll be able to translate some of the work that we've done in other similar Midwest cities to here in St. Louis.
Awesome. So for those listeners who may not be aware of who Frank Romo is or who RomoGIS is, can you tell us a little bit about yourself and the background?
Absolutely. So I'm from Los Angeles, California, born and raised. Wear that badge with pride of honor. You know, it's something that is really near and dear to me. I think Los Angeles really raised me to be the person I am today. My family, Mexican heritage, so come from a big Mexican family. Grew up in Los Angeles, first-generation college student, did a lot of work out there, community organizing, making an impact in communities all across the county. Since then, I've traveled a lot, done work all over the country, geospatial, community organizing, labor organizing, any way to improve our communities and cities. That's something that I'm very interested in. I also have a background in urban planning, so I know that there are many tools that we can use to make an impact, and geospatial is one of those, and so now I'm really leaning into that so we can make a difference in our communities.
And as always, looking sharp. Everywhere you go, everywhere we see, you're always best dressed man in the room. So
I appreciate
tell
that.
us a little bit about what you're wearing.
Oh, right now? Okay, so right now I got my Love Theory shirt on. Love Theory, it's our tagline is See the World Through Love, and it's focused on helping young kids, helping support mental health in young kids. We do a lot of programming, art programming for youth. We've had a few events in Miami during Art Basel. We're going to actually in a week have an event in Detroit. It's an event called Eastern Market After Dark, and we have what we call the Love Wall. We put a big mural up, let people write messages of love, positivity, and kindness. And for me, it's just about making sure that folks know that it's okay to be themselves. It's okay to love yourself and be very proud of who you are. I think for a long time, that was something that I kind of struggled with, maybe shrunk myself in spaces before. And I think, especially when I'm working with youth, whether it's geospatial or on the art side, it's important to remind them that who they are is valuable, and that's something that they should be proud of and share with the world.
Absolutely. Appreciate you sharing that.
That's awesome, Frank. Yeah, we've been following you for years, right? Fanboying from a distance. You've been an advocate for geospatial technology, training, and tradecraft. Tell us how you kind of got into the geospatial space.
So I got into the geospatial space, I think, with the technology when I was at Columbia University. And that was the first time where we had used geospatial technology to do some of the things that I had done a lot of my life. So if we're talking about back in New Orleans when I was organizing, back in Los Angeles when I was organizing, we'd have a table like this. We'd lay out a map on the table and physically say, all right, we got to go to Mr. Robinson's house. We got to go to Miss Davis's house. And we would travel around, knock on doors, make sure people had what they needed, survey the community, understand what needs weren't being met. And so in the past, I had used mapping and geospatial as a way to navigate our cities. But it was only when I was at Columbia University that we took out GPSs, mapped community, concerns and took surveys, and this was after Hurricane Sandy. So there were multiple times where I kind of became a ad hoc emergency manager for communities, both in New Orleans, in New York, and I had done some of that work as well in Chicago. And so for me, the technical piece combined with the community organizing piece was just this kind of aha moment where I was, oh, wow, this can really work together. I think for a long time, it was just urban planning. These are the rules. These are how you would get things done. But what I saw a lot of the time was no matter how much you advocated, no matter how much you had surveys done, you took the information to the politicians, at the end of the day, there was still somebody on the other side that made the decision, on the other side of the table, who made the decision. And if they, with a stroke of their pen, said, well, this business is going to come in here and we're okay with them polluting, or you're not able to get these increased wages or whatever it might be, there was always that power dynamic. And I think for me with geospatial, that's really what I try to focus on, is the power dynamics that are at play. And I want to ensure that the communities that we're working with have access to the technology, to the data, and to the power that comes with the geospatial technologies that we're using.
You've and the conversations we've had in the past, your experience and your background as an organizer seems to really have influenced a lot of what you do now, what you've done in the past, and what you want to do in the future. I'm curious, could you share maybe for the folks in the podcast, other things you've done and how that beginning as an organizer kind of led to some of the things you're working on now?
Right. So in Los Angeles, first thing I started was as a labor organizer. I recognized that in order to make sure food's on the table and the lights are on, you got to get the bills paid. And so that requires getting a job done, making sure you're getting paid a fair wage for the work that you're doing. And we got some good union contracts out in Los Angeles, made sure that we helped support community in that way to ensure that there was no longer abuses going on in workplaces and things like that. And that was a great first step. But then as I came closer to community members that I was working with, I heard about, we don't really have access to healthy food in our neighborhood, or my daughter can't really get access to the tutoring she needs. She's grown into 6th or 7th grade and I can't help her anymore. Where do I get resources? So as I was labor organizing, I started to see that there was many other pieces to this puzzle that needed to be addressed. And so one of the things we did in Los Angeles after some of the labor organizing had happened and we heard about the food insecurity and the food deserts, we worked to get fresh produce into some of the liquor stores in South Central and East LA. And that was a big step in the right direction, because when you have food deserts and when you have lack of access to transportation, these are the things that really start to weigh down on people day in and day out. And when those things aren't accessible, or it's really a lot harder to just do the basics, like going to get groceries or making sure that your child is safe, it's a lot more difficult to participate in the political process or to do anything. And so recognizing that there were many issues in the communities we were working with, I tried to figure out how we can support a more holistic model. And again, that wasn't me saying, oh, we're going to do this. I went, I listened to the community. We talked to people, talked to moms, uncles, grandmas, aunts, and heard what they actually needed, how we can organize, leverage community assets, community organizations, schools, community leaders. Because I think a lot of times when we work with communities, whether it's, me working in Los Angeles or New York or wherever, it's really easy for urban planning or politicians to have this very top-down approach. And for me, that's never worked for our communities. And having that grassroots organizing approach and ensuring that we highlight the stories, the history, the experiential knowledge that these community members have. Like, there are community leaders who have lived there for 30 years, and they can tell you all the problems and they have potential solutions to how to fix it. But they're rarely the ones who get that FaceTime with the politicians or with the local agencies. So one of the things that we really did was empower folks so that they could speak up. And I think that's something we still do today, is try to help people find their voice, try to help people get into a place where they feel confident enough to speak on what it is that's really on their heart. Because for far too long, folks have been carrying it. And then, it just starts to wear you down. And again, that's where being from Los Angeles really showed me that. I always tell folks, being from Los Angeles really taught me that urban planning, however the city gets played out, that it was very clear in LA who got the short end of the stick and why. You know, whether it was because of you were lower income or because you were a minority resident or whatever it might be, we saw that. And, you know, other pieces in LA's history, like I was born in 1990, so I was only 2 years old when the 92 riots happened, but that was part of a history that I was told by my family members, my community members. And we look back at some of the other things, the 1965 Watts riots, all of these pieces where people from LA stood up and were like, we're not taking this anymore. This isn't it. Now, was that the right way to go about it all the time? Maybe, maybe not. You know, everybody has their opinion on that. But at the end of the day, when the systems are broken, we have to do something about it. And so for me, I'm a very big Malcolm fan. And so it's by any means necessary to make sure that we get the job done.
You've been a big believer in it's better to teach a man to fish than to give a man a fish. So the work you've done at the Frederick Douglass Academy centers around teaching young men to use geospatial tools and resources like drones and survey equipment. And really cool part of this story, you've partnered with Seiler, a St. Louis-based company, a large reseller for Trimble, to do some of that work. But rather than you tell those stories, you've been adamant about those young men telling their own stories. You talked about helping people find their voice. Why do you feel that's so important, and even more important for young men?
I think it's really important because, again, if we look at the systems around them, whether it's a school system or whatever it might be, we're often told, well, just stay quiet and fall in line. You got to just keep going with, it may not be fair, but you just got to deal with it. And, again, that's even how I was brought up, where if somebody, in particular, police officer or whatever, you have to just fall in line. That's just the way it is. Don't ask questions about it and just roll with it. But I think it's really important for folks to kind of break from that mold and mentality and say, well, my experience is valid, and that's something that I want to share. And when I share it, it leads somebody else to want to share that as well. And then when 3 or 4 or 5 people are sharing that same experience, you take a step back and you say, oh, dang, this is happening to the entire community. Now we have an ability to organize around certain things. And it's just like when we were labor organizing, folks didn't know that the same thing that was happening to them was happening to somebody in another part of the job, or something that was happening to one of their friends, until they started to talk about it. It was only when you speak up and find that voice that you're able to really try to articulate what a solution looks like. So when we're working with the Frederick Douglass program, which is a Detroit-based program in focus on 9th through 12th graders, teach them geospatial technologies, I always tell them it's not about the GIS. It's about your own personal and professional development. We're here to help you grow and support you in whatever way that means. If you're going to go on and be an artist, if you're going to go on and work for Ford, if you're going to go on and go wherever, it doesn't matter. You're still carrying your personal experiences and that past with you. You're representing your family, you're representing your community, and so we need to know how to speak up and carry that voice with confidence. And it goes back to what I was saying earlier, that pride and that confidence building, it really is the foundation for whatever we're going to do, whether it's a job or school or sports. It doesn't matter. That confidence is key to success.
So it's interesting, maybe to follow on to that. Obviously, this is the Insight City podcast, right? It's all about the Downtown North Insight District and how all of these new capabilities for geospatial technology and other technologies are coming to St. Louis to try and expand, grow, do capacity planning and growth. I'm curious, over the last few months, us, Brian, I, and you have talked about several things. Some of the initiatives that we'd like to do here, for example, entrepreneur mentorship, helping to bring geography education to the K through 12 level, not just at the college level. Some of those things you've already done in cities like Detroit. I'm just curious, are there lessons learned from some of that work that we should be thinking about applying here in St. Louis?
Absolutely. I think, so I've done some work in Detroit. We're doing some work in Nashville and the Bronx. I've had my fair share of kind of different cities. And I think for me, it comes back to my organizing model. Sometimes you just got to shut up and listen. And that's really a big part of it. Listening not just to give somebody some, fake lip service, but listening with your heart and listening about what's really going on. As I always tell folks, we can invest a bunch of money, we can have all these programs, but if we're not really talking the language of the students or the community, they're not going to want to play ball. They're not going to want to jump in. And I think in order to speak that language, you have to first whenever we walk in somewhere, acknowledge the privilege that you're coming with, acknowledge that maybe you're not from there. So you got to know, I don't know everything. I'm not here. I may be an expert in GIS, but I'm no expert in what's going on here in St. Louis. So I need to find those experts, and I need to work with those experts and empower those people. And that goes back to what you were saying, Brian, teaching people to fish, because there are already people in local communities who are doing darn good jobs. And those are the folks that I like to partner with, because I'm here for a day, then maybe I travel somewhere else. I always work with communities and say, hey, I'm not here just for a one and done. I'm here for a long-term growth strategy and what that looks like. And so even if I'm here for a few days, I'll be back next month, or I'll be back again. And that goes very much back to what I've done when I was an organizer, bounced around. And it is, Brian spoke today at Phos4G, and he talked about relationships. And that is what it is about, maintaining those relationships and making sure that we know that those relationships are genuine, because whether you've invested millions of dollars or you're handing out free food or whatever it might be, folks know when your intentions are real and when they're not. And when they're not, they'll still take the food because they might be hungry, but that's not a good way to build a long-term relationship. That's not sustainable. And so some of the things that I've learned while on the road is just making sure that every time I do my best to humble myself and say, hey, Frank, you got to walk in here with your ears open, your mouth closed, and just learn and learn and learn. And so many people don't get the ability to speak about those experiences in their lives, what they're facing in their communities, that sometimes you just ask a question and step back, and the floodgates open, and they start to talk and they start to explain what's going on. And in there, if you listen strongly enough, you'll start to hear where their solutions lie, and they're talking about it, they're speaking it, and you're like, oh man, they're absolutely right. That's the same thing somebody else said. And that's where that confidence, that voice comes in again. If I'm speaking all the time, I can't hear their voice and I can't hear their perspective.
Yeah, that's good.
So we've all been Esri educated, right? And I love that. One of mine and Anthony's favorite quotes from Jack Dangermond was, he used to say, be interested, not interesting. And I think it's really awesome too that you're doing that, right? There is power in being interested. Anthony and I have been working real hard too. Here in St. Louis, there's always been a big focus on national defense, right? We've had NGA here since the beginning of time. Fort Leonard Wood's down the road. It's where we train all of our soldiers. USGS is just down the road. We've got US Transcom across the Mississippi River over in Illinois. We're starting to grow those other areas or those other verticals where geospatial cross-cuts that isn't just national defense. And one of the things that we're looking at is making this an epicenter for spatial finance. We're going to have a special session on this Wednesday, and you're going to be part of that. That's a very obvious example. And you've done some work in India around real estate transparency, which is a really great example of these kinds of impacts that spatial finance can have on society. Can you spend a few minutes talking to us a bit about what that included and what the benefits were?
Absolutely. So in about maybe 2014 or 15, I went with the team with the University of Michigan and my main developer. So RomoGIS was kind of already started up. We went through a program through the University of Michigan, worked with the Indian Institute of Human Settlements out in Bengaluru. And what we did was built a Zillow-like app to bring greater transparency to the real estate market, because like in many places, where there is poor data, there is ability for folks to be taken advantage of. There's lack of transparency. There's ability for folks to be taken advantage of. So we found that residents were being kind of very much undercut by the government in terms of when there was time for eminent domain to happen, the government would say, well, even though a property down the street sold for this much, we don't really think that that's what your property's worth. We have a different value for it, and we have a much lower baseline value, but it's eminent domain, so you don't really have a choice. Take the money and have a nice day. And again, we've seen that all over the place, right? Not just in India. We've seen that here in the United States. It takes very different forms. But when it comes down to it, without that transparency in those transactions, so what we did was we researched a bunch of transactions. We put them all next to each other. You would click on an apartment building, and there would be like 4 or 5 different prices. Here in the States, we have the listing price, the sale price, appraisal price, all of those things kind of match up more or less. Well, out there was big discrepancies in those different prices and the appraised price, what the actual value was of the property. And again, multiple community members said, that's not fair. That doesn't seem right. But when it's just one story, those in power are able to say, well, that's just your anecdotal data. I'm not really sure that matters. Again, sorry, have a nice day. But when we heard one story and then another story and then another story, again, that's good, but sometimes that's still not enough. And that's why for me, going back all the way to my work in Colombia when I first learned GIS, I said, oh, dang, this is the tool that brings us another added layer of legitimacy, right? When somebody looks at a map, when somebody has that real-time data, you say, actually, it's not just these person's stories. This is actual data that people are getting, mistreated, screwed over, or pardon the language, but they're getting screwed over because there's no transparency, there's no data, and once you find out that it's happened to 5, 10, and 15 people, now we have an ability to organize. Well, the organizing is great, but the other added tool is the data and the maps, because with that, there becomes this legitimacy that makes it a lot harder for those in power to combat and say, oh, that's not real. Another thing that we worked on briefly when I was in Michigan is something like the Flint water crisis. Flint water crisis is, we had lots of lead and a lot of other contaminants in the water. And again, oh, everything's fine. No, don't worry about it. No, don't worry about it. Everything's good. But, once you kind of lift the hood and you kind of were able to map out where the lead pipelines were and what was going on, you started to see how every family was being affected. And that is bigger than just one person's story. That becomes a community actively being disenfranchised, actively being hostile.
Silenced.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So it's for the folks listening in, it's the 10th of September, 2024. This week happens to be a big week here in the city. We've got the FOSS4G, the free and open source software for geospatial conference here in North America. There's another event called GeoResolution, which is a big event between SLU, St. Louis University, and NGA here in town. Lots of stuff. Brian and I have had the pleasure of walking around with you for the last few days, kind of taking it all in. I'm curious, what are some of the more interesting or innovative things that you've seen, either from the open source community, from the academic side of things? You've had several conversations with folks who are actively engaged in teaching geospatial at a variety of different ages. What are some interesting things that you've seen over the last few days that are worth mentioning?
I think the task that everybody has here is so pronounced. Like, we're here and we're going to make geospatial one of the premier things that we're doing here, and we're going to do it the right way, right? Because it's one thing to say, all right, we're going to just put up a bunch of money and we're going to roll with it. But no, the folks here seem to be really invested in doing it the proper way, which means engaging with the community, which means making sure they're at the table. And all of these organizations, businesses, consortiums, all of these groups, they all are interested in trying to make St. Louis that premier epicenter for students, communities, businesses. And I think, to me, that really hits home for me, because every time I work, I talk about how we need a holistic model. It's not just one piece. We can't just say, all right, we're going to put a bunch of money into training and that'll solve our problem. We're going to make sure we have a bunch of jobs and that'll solve our problem. If you can have a bunch of jobs and nobody will be skilled up, and then we have that gap. You can have a bunch of training and then there's no jobs, and then you have a gap. And so it's really what I've seen really that has been inspiring is that everybody's in this collaborative mode rather than this kind of hyper competitive mode. And I think that really lends a lot to better innovation, and it lends a lot to making sure that more people are at the table. Because once you get in that kind of hyper competitive mode, it's like, well, we don't need to invite them, and then that's a slippery slope. And then same people just in the room, and the same people in the room. So what I've seen is there's this willingness, but then there's also this willingness to get it done, but then it's also about how you do it and how you talk about it, and who you're reaching out to and who is at the table. And to me, again, that really strikes well. Before we jumped in here, we were talking about how I vibe here, and Brian was like, yo, you fit in well. And I'm like, I dig it. It's good, because you can tell that there are good people wanting to make these moves, and it's just a piece here, a piece there, a piece there. And I hope that I can come in and be some part of that equation and hopefully help be that facilitator. I think for me, in my roles as an organizer, as an educator, no matter what it is, I'm always a facilitator between the school and the parents, a facilitator between the community and city council, a facilitator between the geospatial educators and the community. And for me, I really enjoy that role because it helps bring out other people's talents. It's like somebody on the basketball court who's assisting everybody. Oh, here's a behind the back pass. Oh, here's a good pass. You know, when you help put everybody else on, I think that speaks volumes to that person's character and their ability to fit in and facilitate at a larger scale.
Everybody's trying to build everybody up, not cut them down.
Absolutely.
And just as a quick follow up, is that a property that you saw in the successful stories in Detroit and other places? Is this idea that everybody's rowing in the same direction?
Absolutely, because in a place like Detroit, around the Frederick Douglass program, we have an advisory board, and that advisory board is made up of multiple geospatial companies, multiple educators, and you know, it's really easy for them to say, "Oh, I want that guy as my intern," or "I want that person as my intern," like, and could be competitive, but it's not like that. It's, hey, everybody gets a chance. We're all here to support every single one of them, and as long as our gentlemen are moving one step forward, that's something that we can help advance. That's advancing all of us, right?
So Frank, you have a very servant's heart. You're a servant leader. You're a servant worker. These acts of goodness don't happen on their own, and they don't happen without some revenue source behind those. Can you talk to me about how RomoGIS makes money? You know, who are some of your biggest champions, and then maybe even a little bit more into that. What could you do, or what could we do, or what could the Royal we do to help you scale the work you're doing? Because I know that takes time, it takes money, it takes resources. What does that look like?
Absolutely, that's a great question, because I think for me, we've been a relatively lean company, and I've been bootstrapped it, kind of just pack it up. We go to another city, we talk to some people, make some moves, and then we pack it up, go to another city, and do it again, and just repeat and continue to build those relationships. And over the course of time, we've gotten geospatial contracts with cities like City of Atlanta, Dallas, St. Paul, Minnesota. Each of those places, we were doing work that was focused on equity, focused on using geospatial to identify where we can have the greatest impact with our investments, in time, money, or resources. And so we pick up contracts here or there. And then I think whatever the system that we're working in, for instance, in California, we've partnered with an organization called Hope and Heal Fund, and they are focused on gun violence reduction and making sure the communities are safer and those kind of things. And so when we work with organizations, community organizations, what we find a lot is that there's a lot of philanthropies that want to put in some money. So, for instance, our work in California, where we mapped firearm homicides in the state of California, we mapped firearm suicides. Now we're working on intimate partner violence to, again, see the holistic view of what is actually happening in communities. And again, it's neither here nor there on the gun issue per se. At the end of the day, it's about community safety, and what we're focused on is trying to figure out how we make our community safer. Because if I'm trying to teach a kid and he didn't get much sleep last night because there were gunshots outside, that makes a difference to his ability to learn. And so recognizing that, again, all of these community pieces play into each other. So that program in particular, we also trained 30 nonprofit organizations how to use geospatial technology, taught them how to use Excel, taught them how to do things like Freedom of Information Act requests, again, trying to shift those power dynamics. And in that, those things were sponsored by Blue Cross Blue Shield, Kaiser Permanente, why are they doing work on gun violence reduction? Well, if you take a step back, they're serving a lot of communities that are being impacted, and so they have a genuine interest in trying to solve that problem. And so when I work in communities, it really is about finding where the funds are, who are the stakeholders who care about this issue. And when you find the stakeholders who care about that issue, and you can talk about how the geospatial and the technology can advance the conversation, because that issue in particular has been something that has plagued communities for many, many years. But how many of those communities are using technology like geospatial to actually do better in terms of advocating and understanding where the data and who's being impacted? So when you start to find these allies and partners, that's where we've been able to tap into some funds from philanthropic organizations with our STEM education. We focus a lot on workforce development. So career and technical education, workforce development, those are things that every state has. Every state has money to say, we need to upskill our people. We need to get them ready for the tech industry. But a lot of times it just kind of goes by the wayside. And so again, for me, when I come in, I try to find the local champions. I try to be a champion for that. And we try to, beat the drum and say, hey, look at what we're doing over here. This is a great opportunity for you to invest in this program that is uplifting people. And we're preparing folks for the workforce. And so it's really about finding those stakeholders. One of the things that we did as community organizers, no matter where we went, first thing we did was a stakeholder analysis. Who cares about what? Why do they care? And how are we going to get them to move and mobilize so that we can do different and not just sit on the status quo?
Interesting. You mentioned you've talked a lot about the grassroots and the need for education. The one thing we haven't really talked about is the political ramifications or the investment in getting the local politicians involved, educated to the point where they can help be part of the solution. Are there things that maybe St. Louis needs to think about or consider? We've got an election coming up in a few months, both at the local and the national level. Are there things that we maybe need to think about differently, again, based on your experience? Obviously, we don't want to get political on the podcast, but are there just general topic areas that local politicians should be aware of or be concerned about that might help advance some of the social justice programs that you've talked about?
I think recognizing that when you have folks from your community who know how to advocate for themselves, when they know how to speak confidently about the issues that they're facing and provide real world solutions, we gotta listen, because a lot of times it can be very political, or it can be just, that's just an angry, resident or something like that. For us, it's about really making sure that we can educate people. When we work at RomoGIS, we always talk about we educate, we organize, and then we mobilize. And education is really at the core of that. We have to educate folks about what the issues are, what the solutions are, what the potential opportunities are. And then we organize with the stakeholders. Who are the stakeholders? How do we get them at the table? How do we make sure that everybody is on the same page? And then we push for the mobilization. That mobilization could be funding. That mobilization could be making sure that we have more opportunities for students. Whatever that looks like, that allows us to showcase the power of the community. You educate about the issue, educate about the opportunities, you organize around those things, and then you mobilize. And when you mobilize, I think that's where you get a lot of visibility. Every time I'm working in a community, I always tell them, what's the easy win? Where can we come in and make an easy win so that we can then build on that momentum? Because that momentum is really what helps continue to keep people's confidence, continue to move the ball forward. Every time we organize or do some kind of programming, no matter what it is, not just us, but just in general, sometimes it can feel like 2 steps forward, 3 steps back. And again, that can be very demoralizing over and over and over again. And it makes folks feel like, well, are we actually making progress? And that's not the kind of demeanor we want. We want to be able to say, hey, look, we got a little victory here. Yeah, we didn't get it all, but we're still fighting for another day, and we still can do it again. And so recognizing how those small victories can really start to snowball. And I think we've seen that at the work that we've done in Detroit. And now we're doing work in the Bronx. We got brought in to do some conversations around community mapping, community safety. And now I'll be back in the Bronx in like a few weeks for our third interaction with that community over the past 3 months. And I can see a snowball start to go, and more people are starting to pay attention, and more folks are saying, how do I get my student involved? Wait, this is something we can make a career out of? How do we get involved? And so those little victories start to add up, and I think that's what really can change the landscape.
The storytelling is important.
Absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah.
We're super proud of the work that you've done. We're proud to know you. We're proud to be, kind of in your orbit. And you've achieved a lot. And there's a lot of programs you have going on. What, if you could pick the one thing of your accomplishments, are you most proud of to this point?
The one thing that I'm most proud of is probably the one thing that I don't talk about a lot is the work that I've done at the city of Detroit. I came on as a consultant with the city of Detroit, 7-8 years ago. And one of the things that they needed help with was their 911 system. And so if you remember, Detroit had bankruptcy. During that bankruptcy, you had a lot of layoffs. You had a lot of municipal services that were cut back. And through that, we had a lot of bad press and publicity about, it's taking police forever to get to our house, or they're not responding, they're not showing up. And so, of course, it's about resources in that capacity, but also when you have such a large city, you have to have a technical infrastructure that is working. And when there was bankruptcy, the technical infrastructure was one of the first things to go, right? Because we needed the first responders. We need those folks to still be in the streets. But the technical infrastructure, we don't need that many technicians, we'll be okay. So I came into the city of Detroit and I saw that the 911 infrastructure, in terms of the mapping infrastructure, the geocoordinates and all those things, it just wasn't up to par. And I said, hey, and they trusted me. And this is credit to them. They really trusted my opinion and the work that I had done. And I said, we got to start over. Like, we got to start fresh, because this is just a mishmash. We've all seen it in the geospatial. 20 hands have touched it. Nobody's had any documentation. And now it's just kind of like a Frankenstein. And that doesn't lead to efficient operations. And so, working at the city of Detroit, I revamped the 911 system by updating the CAD system, the computer-aided dispatch, updating the street network. But then I could have stopped there, right? That was my job as a technician, to do the GIS. But I knew, as a holistic community approach, that wasn't going to cut it. So then I held trainings for the call takers. I held trainings for the dispatchers. I worked with the police in the streets. I worked with the firefighters in the streets, went on ride-alongs to see what the issues were. I sat there and I listened. And in doing that, I would say that we greatly improved the 911 system. We reduced call times, reduced intake time. And that was something, to me, that was really beneficial, because when you're doing emergency management, emergency response, those seconds count. And you show up on the wrong side of the building, and that person could not make it because you might have been a few seconds too late. And so for me, I really felt like that was doing really impactful work. But the one thing, I guess, going back to my labor organizing piece, was that I saw the staff that I was working with, the call takers, the dispatchers, the law enforcement officials, who already had such a difficult job, who may had felt that 2 steps forward, 3 steps back. Oh man, again? Oh man, the map's wrong again? They might have felt that. I saw their demeanor change during that time. I saw them become more confident in the system. They became more confident in themselves, and they took more pride in their work. And again, that's not to say that I did that, but I think when we're talking about labor, the things that we do for a living, folks want to take pride in what they do. And if they can't get their job done properly, it's hard to do that. And so for me, that was one of the things that I really poured my heart and soul into. And it was something that I think was I was very happy to see when, the system worked properly. Okay, we reduced the intake time. That's great. And it was amazing to see the map that I worked on 30, 40 CAD computers all over the 911 floor. And I was like, damn, okay, that's pretty badass. I was like, this is really cool. So that's one of the things that I think I'm really most proud of, because it touches a little bit of everything, a little bit of the tech, a little bit of the personal aspect, a little bit of the longevity for the city, but also was impacting the residents' lives every single day. And, when I was in Detroit, I couldn't not hear a siren and think about, are they going to the right place? Is the map correct? What's going on? So being able to, I'm sure if I felt that way, that's the way some of the first responders felt. So being able to support them in that way was something that was really meaningful to me. And it wouldn't have happened if it wasn't for those relationships. And the relationships I had with the fire chief and the police chiefs, that was what made it possible. Those relationships and that caring about the job and the people is really what made that impact.
So, obviously there's a very captive audience on the other end of these microphones. You've talked a lot about, the entrepreneurial mentorship, the capacity building, the social justice, all these programs and activities that you're involved in. For folks listening, how do they help you? How do they get involved? What can they do to obviously, what we're really here to do, help St. Louis grow and maybe follow in the footsteps of some of the successes that you've seen and helped in Detroit? How can the folks on the other end here learn or help or contribute?
I think for us in particular, coming down to St. Louis has been really remarkable. And if Brian and you have been remarkable of introducing me to so many people and talking to my work, and that's great. But I always, as Brian said, teach a man to fish. I'm just me. I'm just a guy, I want folks to know that they can do this work too. I've had so many people at the Esri conferences, at other conferences, Frank, we really love your work. How do I do something like that? I see this want in people to want to make a change. The geospatial professionals, they have that in them. Oh, we want to use this for good. We want to use this for impact, but I'm not quite sure. And so being able to learn from some of the projects that we've had is great. I'm always open to mentoring, supporting people. I've helped multiple people start their own businesses in geospatial, and now they're doing something similar. And again, I could be really easy and say, oh, well, I don't want to help them because they might take some market share or whatever. No, it's about the more of us there are, the greater the impact, because I can't be everywhere and I'm not the answer. It's how do we make more folks like us who can do this work and do this impact? So when folks ask me that question, especially here in St. Louis, I'm saying, well, put me in contact with a local school or find somebody who has the want to do this work, because if we get that kind of ambition and that motor running, I have no doubt that we can do great things together. And so for me, it's about getting in contact with the right people. I think both of you have really been supportive of showing me around the city and introducing me to those folks and being able to find those opportunities. And of course, that does mean also funding opportunities and things like that, so that we can scale these programs and have them be long term, not just a kind of one and done, but really see what is St. Louis and the geospatial space and the social justice piece and the entrepreneurship and the education, what does that look like 10 years from now? And where do we want it to be and how do we get there? And I think it is through the relationship building, through the willingness to put others first and kind of be there and just take a step back and let other people shine and lead. And that's what we try to do with our students, right? The happiest I am is when the students or my client or somebody can stand up there, present to 300 people, and they're talking about the GIS and they're talking about how they made a community impact. And that to me is one of the best moments. If I could share a story.
Please, yeah, by all means.
So at Frederick Douglass Academy, our students, we were on the west side of the city, and then we moved to a new location in the center of the city. And during that time, a lot of our students, they come from all over the city. And so they take the bus. And during that time, some of our students kind of got lost in the sauce. They got lost on the bus. They went the wrong direction. And so two of our seniors, two of my interns, shout out Xylon and DeAnthony, they're really great. They just graduated. Congrats to them. And were really great interns. And they said, Frank, man, some of the guys got lost on the bus. Like, we could probably create an app or something, right? And I was like, you guys know how to do that. You guys know exactly how to do that. They took the data of where our students lived, obfuscated their homes so you couldn't really see it or whatever. But they said, okay, you live on this block. Here's where the two buses are to get down to Frederick Douglass Academy. And they built an app, and that app was something that the students used day in and day out. And Xylon and DeAnthony, one of my proudest moments of them was when they went and spoke on a stage of 300 people and talked about that. But that wasn't the proudest. When they were talking to their peers and they were inspiring their peers and saying, you guys can do this too. Look, this is how we make an impact in our community. This is how GIS can help our community out. Again, shout out again, DeAnthony, one of my guys, he, for just this past conference, made a story map, and he got an award for the state of Michigan, and it was looking at food access and poverty in the city of Detroit and how we could potentially have other farming or urban ag opportunities to connect some of the under-resourced communities with some of these big food distributors and things like that. So for me, it wasn't about the GIS. It was about that moment when my students or the community members I've trained flipped that switch and said, okay, based on my experience, based on what I know how to use this GIS to its highest capacity now. And that is where I know that I've done my job, and they're able to kind of run with it.
You can see the light bulb turn.
Yeah, absolutely.
That aha moment.
That spreads, right? It wasn't just them. It was, now there was two of them, and they were presenting I remember they had the iPad, and they were presenting to it, and they were talking about it, and you saw the younger guys, they were just looking at them like, oh, wow. That was amazing, and that was inspiration, right? For them to see other gentlemen who look like them, who have this peer network. For me, that's also really important. How do you have this peer-to-peer support? Because folks are going to listen to folks that they relate to more, and that also the intergenerational learning, it doesn't stop at the classroom. The students take that information home with them. The students talk to their family members about it. educate them about what drone technology is and what GIS is, and they're opening up the eyes of their entire family. And that, again, is how you make change, by one household at a time, one neighbor at a time, one resident at a time. And before you look, take a step back, now the whole community's popping.
One of the things that Anthony and I have realized, and I think a lot of people in St. Louis are realizing, is that the only way we achieve true success is we're going to have to build that connective tissue, right? And we know that that's not all here. It's part of the reason we reached out to you. It's part of the reason we reach out to a lot of our friends that don't necessarily live here, because we've all got something that we could contribute, right, to the stew, and it's going to make it really, really good. There's a home for you here, and there's a value in having you here, and I think we already know that. Walking away at the end of this week, and I realize we still have all day tomorrow and all day Thursday, and you don't roll out till Friday. What does walking away from St. Louis this week, what does success look like when you hop on a plane Friday and you head north to Detroit?
That's a great question. I think for me, success looks like all the hands I've shaken, the people who again, cool, you did a program in Detroit. Who cares? Like, it doesn't, like, it's not like, oh, wow, I'm not here to be this, like, oh, look at what you've done over there. Because at the end of the day, when folks don't see it in their community, it's a lot harder to relate. And so for me, what actually is success is that when I spoke with those people, they feel that I'm genuine. They feel that I'm authentic, that I'm not here to just pulling over them or trying to come take some funds or whatever. When I walk into communities, right, as an outsider, that happens sometimes. They're like, what are you doing here? Who are you? Right? The first time I went to the Bronx, it was like, okay, we're a few people were very welcome to have you. And then other folks like, so why are you here? And I'm just like, I'm here because I want to serve and I want to be a support system for you, a resource. Utilize me as a resource. And so I think success looks like making those genuine connections, because those genuine connections last far beyond an email or a link or something like that. Those genuine connections are where somebody says, I got a student who needs help. I have a school that we could really work with, and like, I want to call Frank, right? There's that in the back of their mind. I know that that's the right guy for the job. So for me, that's what success looks like, is having those genuine relationships and conversations where, and again, it doesn't just happen over one conversation. That's why this week has been successful so far, because I've had to have multiple conversations and multiple touch points, because you can't get it all done in one conversation, right? At some point, I'm just spitting facts about stuff, and that's not who I am, right? I want folks to see who I am, and I want to see who they are. And that's where we find that common ground, and that's how we can really move forward in a genuine capacity. I played sports my whole life a lot, and so it is about knowing that the guy next to you has your back and knowing that you have their back. And that creates a different type of strength. That creates a different type of camaraderie.
Well, Frank, I want to thank you for sharing a lot of your stories today. I think there's a ton we can learn. I hope that you'll come back. I hope that you'll continue to be a part of the growth here in St. Louis. Where can folks go to learn more about you, about your background, about RomoGIS, about GIS for Good? Where can they go to learn more?
Absolutely. So, we have RomoGIS.com. That's kind of our main page. I'm really active on LinkedIn. I think that's where we got all connected. And I think that's where I really try to connect with the geospatial community too, because there's a lot of folks out there who want to do this work, aren't sure how to do it. So by showing and not telling is really the best way to do that. And so on LinkedIn, I'm there. On Instagram at GIS #4 good. And that's really, our main channels. We have this podcast coming out. I always like speaking on podcasts because it kind of gives you a little bit of the real. I'm not here just like up there presenting like with my suit and tie on. I'm like, all right, I'm here. Let's just chop it up and have a conversation. But as I always tell folks, I'm here. Reach out to me. I always handle my cards and whatever. I'm like, yeah, that's my number, man. You hit me up. And if it's, I always tell the students too, whenever, 9 o'clock, 10 o'clock at night, holler at me. I'm here. Because one of the conversations I had this week that was really impactful was talking about how do we get to students here in St. Louis? How do we actually get them to the table and get them to learn these skills, et cetera? And what I said is that when we're working in communities that have been disenfranchised, or communities that have not had as many resources as some other communities might have, or like I said before, you got to jump on 2 buses to get to school or whatever it might be, right? Those barriers, they start to wear down on people. So what I told folks is that a lot of times when you are that leader, you have to go the extra mile just to get somebody to the table. And that's not the end of the job. That's just the start of the job, right? You got to go above and beyond just to make sure folks are showing up, they're fed, they're well rested, and you have their interest as a person in mind first before a technician or a student or whatever. You care about the person first. And if you do that, that's how you build those genuine connections. And I'll say this much, I'm here to work with you all and go that extra mile or two with you all, because I see that same thing here. I think one of the best things that has happened is I see a lot of reflections here of me, of folks who, like Brian, like yourself, who are doing this for the right reasons and are trying to make that impact. And when you see that, that's how you know you're in the right place.
The energy's high.
Thank you for having the faith in us to hop on a plane, to accept an open invite to come down here. Thanks on behalf of Insight City and the team from Cartel who wedged this in at the last minute, right? We asked to make it happen with no notice, but we thought it was really important. So thanks. Look forward to spending the rest of the week with you, and I can't wait to see this come out and look back on it and realize what a good time we had. So thanks, Frank.
Thank you very much for having me. And St. Louis, here we come.
Yep.